So now we're going to talk about how to find the midpoint of 2 points. And so what is midpoint? Let's talk about that to begin with. So midpoint, you can kind of tell from the name of it, it's exactly the point that's in the middle, okay, midpoint. So let's write that down. It's the point in the middle. So if you're finding the midpoint, and you can see the point that's in the middle, then you already know it, okay? So like if you had like a graph, or if they gave you two coordinates and one of them ended up being here and then the other one ended up being like right there, and they asked you what is the midpoint, well, think about that as like a line. Where is the point that's in the middle of that line? And so you could tell just by kind of looking at it that point right there is in the middle, because it has like the same length on each side. That has 2 units, that has 2 units. So whatever the coordinate of that point is the midpoint. So your answer would be 2, 2. Okay, so for problems like that, the midpoint is not so hard to find, because you can actually kind of just look at it and figure it out. What we're going to be doing is, well, what if they give you coordinates and it's a little harder to find the midpoint? Well, there's 2 ways you can think of it. There is a formula, so you can use the formula. So the formula to find the midpoint, it is a point. So the thing you have to remember is that it's still going to have an x and a y value. So I'm going to just make a big point here, and I'm going to put a comma in the middle of them. So it's still going to have an x part and it's still going to have a y part, just like my example had. That point that was in the middle still had an x and a y value. But this time, you have to know how to find it. Well, to find the midpoint, you're going to take your x values of both of the coordinates, you add them, and then you divide by 2. Okay, and I'm going to explain why you do that in just a minute. So that would help you find the x part of your midpoint. And then to find the y part of it, you kind of do the same thing, but with the y values. So you add them, and then you divide by 2. Now, why is that? Why do you add the x's and divide by 2 and then add the y's and divide by 2? What you're really doing, because like think about your grades. If you were trying to find the middle of your grades, well, typically we would average your grades. Well, what does the average mean? That means you add them up and then you divide by however many they are. So what we're doing here is we're finding the middle of 2 points. And so what we have to do essentially is you average the x values. So you average your x's, and then you average your y values. Okay? So another way of thinking about it, instead of having to memorize another formula, is you could just think, to find the midpoint, you're going to average your x's, so add them, and because there's just going to be 2 of them, you divide by 2. And then you average your y's. So you add up your y values and then divide by 2. Okay? And so that's a much easier way of remembering it rather than having to memorize another formula. Okay? So let's practice this. If we were having to find the midpoint of these 2 points and it was something that we couldn't find easily, then to find the midpoint, you're going to think, I have to average my x's and then average my y's. So you're going to make a big coordinate, and you're going to put a little comma in the middle so that you have your x and your y's, and then you average them. So my x values, those are my x values. So you take those, and I can label it with a 1 and a 2. You take them and add them, so it'd be -2 plus 5, and then you divide by 2. So that's my x's. Then you take the y values and you do the same thing. So this would be like my y1 value. That would be my y2 value. So I'm going to take them, 3 plus 9, and then divide by 2. And then all you have to do is simplify. So the midpoint, the point that would be in the middle of those 2 points, well, -2 plus 5 is 3. And then 3 over 2 will give you a decimal. So I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. And then 3 plus 9, that would be 12, and then 12 divided by 2, would give me 6. So the midpoint, the point that would be in the middle of those two, would be at 3/2 or 1.56. All right, and then you could graph it. You could graph these two, and then you could kind of graph that one and see if it looks like it's in the middle, just to verify, okay? So let's do one more that's like that, and then we're going to do some that are a little bit challenging type problems, all right? So if we have to find the midpoint of those 2 points, you're finding the point in the middle of them. So again, you could graph these, and you could find the point that's in the middle of them. And this one would actually be an easier one because notice your y values are the same. And so if you graph them, you'll notice that there's something special about that one where you could find the midpoint easy. But I'm going to show you how to use the formula. So, or I guess the other way of thinking about it. So you're going to draw your coordinate. You got your x's and your y's. So we're going to start with our x's. You average them. So that means you take each x value and add them. So it would be -1 plus -20. Notice I just take them and I add them. Okay. And then you divide by 2. And then you have to do the same thing with your y's. So it would be -8 plus -8 divided by 2. And then that'll give us the y coordinate. So if I simplify that, -1 plus -20 is -21, and then divide by 2, that would give me a decimal, so I'm going to leave it as -21 over 2. And then -8 plus -8, that's -16, but then divide by 2, I get -8. Okay, so your midpoint would be that, or if you actually wrote it as a decimal, it'd be -10.5, -8. Okay, and sometimes when you're graphing, it is easier to think of as a decimal. All right, so that's how to find the midpoint. You can either plug it in the formula, or you can think about it where you're averaging your x's, so add them and divide by however many there are, and then you're averaging your y's separately. Okay,